Oh, welcome everybody for the Mass Party Labor event tonight. Appreciate you showing up on a nice night like this in August. It's actually pretty decent outside for the first time in a while. No, the humidity's down, and so is the temperature. But again, my name is Dean Gunderson. I'm a state employee working with the unemployment insurance, and I'm a member of MAPE, which is a union made up of almost 13,000 state employees who basically handled all sorts of things with the state. We were, I'm dealing with a part tonight talking about what happened with our little mini drama as now is sort of unfolding with a budget, and which caused thousands of state employees to be out of work and services to be interrupted with the state of Minnesota. It's sort of it is the prequel to the what happened on a national level almost with the debt ceiling, and that's kind of where the perspective that I wanted to bring to you tonight. First of all, talking about the budget impasse that took place probably 5 minutes after the election, after the ballots were counted in November. I mean, everybody sort of knew that this was possibly going to be the what was going to happen. We knew that with the Democratic governor, Dayton, and a Republican legislature, that this was not going to be a year that the budget was going to be solved in April and everybody was going to go home. It dragged out and dragged out. The one thing that you have to remember is that the Republicans had a very, very long, detailed agenda, which was, we're not raising taxes. We're not raising taxes, and we're not raising taxes, and that was all three of their manifest. That was their manifesto when they started in the beginning of the year and kept it up throughout the entire legislative session. They weren't really interested in anything else other than the fact that they were not going to bring any revenue. What we had in Minnesota was enough. What our budget, even though costs have gone up and services are more in demand than ever, they were not going to raise revenue, if at all. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, and specifically in the House legislature, there were 33 freshman Republican House members this year, and they were really the core of the no tax group. And in fact, I think if they had not been all elected at one time, they probably would have not been so full of bravado in terms of willing to see the state shut down for their own agenda, which was to not have any new taxes, including those at the end. It was, I think, the longest time Governor Dayton said was for the top 2%. Only the top 2% would state earners would have an income tax increase, but that they didn't want anybody to have a tax increase. In fact, they referred to those people, they're very wealthy, as the job creators, and they weren't going to destroy our chance of recovery by taxing them. Instead, they would rather lay people off and slash benefits as their means to get us out of a recession in Minnesota. Which, I mean, it doesn't even make any sense, but that's what they were going for. I mean, we look at, in terms of the election, if it had been, it would have been a situation where we would have gone the way of Wisconsin had Tom Emmer had won in the election. So we are grateful for the fact that we do have a Democratic governor. Unfortunately, we knew that eventually the governor probably would cave in on the demands of the Republican Party, and they did after the shutdown, after the first budget impasse on June 30th. Then the state was shut down, except for the functions that were deemed critical. And those functions, basically kept unemployment insurance checks going, and some of the state patrol employed, and some of the other things were also considered critical. But that was the only thing, and the rest of were laid off. And the reason I think that it became so impossible to deal with the Republicans is that Republicans, in this group especially, really hate government. And because they hate government, they don't really care if it works or not. And they would just as soon have no one working. In fact, I think they sort of enjoyed the fact that the state was shut down. So given that, I mean, Dayton was forced to basically negotiate against himself and try to come up with proposal after proposal, trying to get the Republicans to come to the table and actually negotiate a budget that would make sense. And they simply refused. In 21 days into the state shutdown, Dayton then agreed to their final plan, which was what they had proposed prior to the shutdown on June 30th, which was to, one, shift payments from the schools. It's interesting how, I mean, this is all government talk, and I've been working for the state for a number of years, but you know, we can say that we're increasing education budget, but we're not going to pay them. We're going to pay them in the future, and that's not considered a cut, but it really is, because the likelihood that the educational institutions, the schools in the state, are going to get the money that they were promised is pretty far-fetched. I mean, and they put off now billions of dollars into the future that they're going to pay them in the future. They said that they can borrow the money locally, which of course then means that the state is not in debt, but the school districts are in debt for that money until they're paid for by the state. The other things that they did were including cutbacks to various programs in the state, you know, which I wanted to get into some today in terms of, because we're so close to the University of Minnesota, for example. They agreed to cut the University of Minnesota budget, the state portion, by 15%. Originally they had wanted more, the Republicans had wanted a bigger cut, and Dayton had wanted a less cut, but it turned out that that was the negotiated settlement in the budget. The Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, Dayton wanted a 6% cut, and then they ended up with more closer to a 10% cut. So that just with the university. Some of the more hideous cuts included the cuts to the state health and human service budget. The budget itself, interestingly enough, what was passed in like hours was the bill that was 923 pages long. Of course, none of them read it, but it included various cuts, and including cuts to child care for working adults. It will make it harder for them to get grants and so on in order to be able to work and go and have their children in daycare. There's cuts to other programs that help working families. There's cuts that have to do with the cutting programs for the elderly and people with disabilities. One specific cut that talked about if you're disabled, then you have some member of your family helping you, and the state helping you stay out of a nursing home or another institution. You're going to have your pay cut by 20% this year, because obviously you're getting rich because of the fact that your relatives are disabled and you're helping them. You know, that was one of the most onerous cuts I think that they could make. I was talking to somebody who was with the Association for Retarded Adults, Citizens in ARC in Minnesota, and he was saying that how that impacted his clients, and especially clients out in rural areas where the only people that can take care of are the relatives. They have no other choice because there's no other people that will do the work as a personal care attendant. Medical assistance somewhat was saved. They kept some of it, but they are eliminating some of the taxes. And the Minnesota Care Provider Tax is going to be eliminated beginning later on in 2020, they said. And that was a major source of funding for a lot of programs in Minnesota. So they're dealing with a lot of cutbacks to, things that were considered reforms now are no longer part of the solution. There is a $4 million. There are cuts to vocational rehabilitation, state services for the blind, and goes on, and those are that considered more acceptable than raising taxes on the top 2%, or at the end it was 1% of the wealthiest people in Minnesota. In the end, it was those who were making an income of $1 million or more were like in the last group that Dayton had said could be taxed to save some of these cuts. But even that was too much for the Republicans to stomach. They refused to do that, and in the end, Dayton ended up agreeing to their solution, which was was taking cuts to the education department, our education budget, and shifting payments into the future sometime. It's sort of like storing up riches to heaven. Eventually you'll get it. Promised later on. They didn't cut some of the departments, like human rights was going to be completely eliminated. but they saved that at the end. Instead of a 65% cut to the agency, which would have just gutted it because they wouldn't have had an agency left after that, they cut it by 15%. Some of the increases, they did increase the Department of Corrections because they, that's one thing that they Republicans and Democrats can agree on, is that we need jails, I guess. But some of the other functions of government were cut in between 5 and 10%, where the rest of the agencies were cut. I'm more concerned with the cuts to the people that that have these services, because we were dealing with the most vulnerable people that need state services at a time, probably the most difficult time in their life. But it doesn't seem to have any impact on our legislators, especially the freshman Republicans in the House, who were more than willing to cut the budget in order to make sure that there was no increase in taxes. As far as Minnesotans themselves had favored a balanced budget approach to the cuts, where they wanted cuts and revenue increases. Poll after poll had that was overwhelmingly in favor of having both revenue increases with moderate cuts, but that was not what the Republicans wanted in the legislature. I've talked to some of the people that were involved with the negotiations, and actually the Republican leadership was actually afraid of their members, because they were afraid of negotiating at all, because they were afraid that they would be deposed or whatever if the Republicans, the freshmen, were revolted. You have to remember that some of these people never expected to win office. It was more or less just an anti-incumbent vote. Some of them had never even been to the legislature before they became legislators themselves. Often, many of them had never even seen the inside of a committee room. They barely campaigned. They maybe had two mailings that went out, and they won because people were really upset with the incumbents. It was very much 2010 was very much an anti-incumbent year. One of the things we talk about in the Mass Party of Labor is that it would be nice to have an alternative to the Democratic Party rather than rather than just the Republicans, and that's one of the things that we'll probably discuss tonight. I guess that's pretty much it. I just want to wrap it up and say that it's been an interesting year, and then after that we had the national debate over the debt ceiling. If they would have ended a couple wars, I'm sure that we would have never had the situation where we had to raise the debt ceiling at all, but unfortunately that's not the case. But I'll stand for questions afterwards, and anybody who wants to talk about the state, that's it's more than be more than willing to stay after and listen and take questions. But again, this is sort of the prequel to what happened in the national level. So thank you.